All right, so today we're back taking a look at top-down mixing. Now, if you missed the last video, I'll link to it in the description of this one. But we were exploring an old mix done bottom up and then starting over from scratch doing the same mix top down. This is my first time really diving into top down. I'm exploring it to share what I learn and to compare it with bottom up mixing so I can give my insights on it. If you're new to top down mixing or you're into it and you just want to see more about it, then come along with me while I learn about top down mixing. So first, let's take a listen to what we had done so far. First, the bottom up and then the top down. And the top down is not really finished yet. I only got so far into it until it was sounding decent, but it still has a way to go. And the bottom up mix still sounds pretty superior in my ears, has a lot more energy. But let's take a listen.
Yeah, I'm gonna put it right between their minds. Well, I'd rather go blind than see you win. Yes, I'd rather die trying than to let you live. Get your game on. Bring it on, bring it on. Right between their minds. Well, I'd rather go blind than see you win. Yes, I'd rather die trying than to let you live. Get your game on.
All right, so let's dive into the top-down mix, and I'll show you where we're at. So the first things that jump out to me comparing the two mixes is, first of all, the low end and the bottom up mix is cleaner. And one of the first things I'm going to do here is side chain the low end of the bass to the kick and focus on the low end, cleaning it up. Also, the snare drum in the top down mix is still very weak and the effects are not where they need to be for the reverb sends. Overall, the snare still sounds too thin, so we're going to address that. And one of the most glaring things is the lack of power in the top-down mix in the guitar bus. There's some rhythm guitars going on that just have way more energy in the bottom-up mix. So I'm going to start with addressing those three things. And I'm going to start with the snare drum. And so the snare has absolutely zero processing on the two tracks so far. I processed from the top down and then programming one reverb send. And so far the snare bus just has limiting and clipping on it, some tape saturation, transient shaper, more saturation, and then exciter. But it's really missing what I had on the bottom up mix, which was the two different snares being processed independently, which I completely expected. So now I'm going to go ahead and do some processing on the two individual snares that are blended together and get a better sound. All right, so I spent about 10 minutes doing some work on the snares, and let me show you what happened. So here's the two blended snares with the effects turned off. So what I went ahead and did is put EQ on both of those tracks. Now, so far being true to top down, I haven't done any track work on the two snares. I've only been processing the bus. So I added this EQ to the one snare to clean it up and highlight the parts that I like, and this EQ to the other to clean it up to highlight the parts that I like. And so let me play you that snare again, and then I'll turn the EQs on. And with both the EQs on, yeah, very, very big difference. Yeah, that's much more closer to what I was going for. Now, just by adding those two EQs, I did have to come back into my snare bus and readjust some of the settings on limiter number 6. I had the compressor dialed in right where I wanted it, and it was no longer responding the same, to be expected, because the snare drums did not have any high passing on them. Now they do. So the compressor was barely reacting, if at all. So I had to adjust the compressor, and then I have this set to compressor before limiter, so it led me to doing minor adjustments to the limiter and the clipper. And I guess that's all to be expected with the top-down approach. And to be fair, these things can totally happen from a bottom-up approach. You make adjustments, and then you have to work your way up the chain, as it would be, and adjust things like this. So is what it is. But another thing that happened after doing that was my expander that I'm using for my gated reverb, the threshold was no longer dialed in where it needed to be, so that had to be adjusted. And again, this is things that can happen in bottom-up mixing as well, but just wanted to point it out. And that's all all logical, makes sense. So on the snare reverb send, I also added this EQ, which should have been here all along, rolling off the lows that I don't want. And the mid boost here, right at just under 500 hertz, is where I have hollowed out the EQ on each of the individual snare tracks now. So there's not a lot of information around 500 from the snares. So this is a nice little pocket for adding reverb to the snares there, which is a really neat little trick if your mix allows for it, which at currently this one does. And I have decreased the reverb at the vocal clarity spot, which I'm probably going to change that Q value here in a bit. But then I added some high EQ on top and a little boost around 7K as well. So I added that EQ, and then I also added a second reverb, which is dialed in quite differently to get a completely different texture, highlighting more on the lower frequencies and the early reflections. So now I have a more complex reverb sound. Let me play you the new snare with the EQs and the adjustments with the reverb the way it was before. And with the EQ added and the secondary reverb on, this is now what it sounds like. Yeah, very nice. Now the reverb is more under control. It's more complex. It's more the way I want it. And it mellowed it out a bit as well. So I may end up turning up the reverb effects send on the snare bus. No problem. So now we'll pop the snare back in the mix and adjust this particular reverb send. All right, I don't want to bring that too forward just yet, but there we go. That sounded a lot better than it was before. So now we're going to go ahead and move on to side chaining the bass to the kick and work on cleaning up our low end. All right, so about another 10, 12 minutes in, and I have the low end cleaned up a little bit and some side chains going on, so let me show you those. So real quick, here's the kick drum in the Spectrum Analyzer. So what's going on here is we have the blended kick, and one has a fundamental that's right around 54 hertz, and the other one has one that's right around 45, 44. So these two little spikes right here, those are the two different fundamentals of the two different kicks. And then you can see that it has a nice little thwopping sound right here at about 150, which I'm going to EQ out. And it has a nice solid presence around 100 here that I really like, which is also right where the low end of the bass is pretty heavy. So this gives me an idea of what I'm working with here. So I have the bass track split between a low and a high, and on the bass low, which is just that low rumble there. So that's the side chain I have going on for the bass low. I have it dipping out right in between the two fundamentals of the kicks, so right at about 49 hertz. This is a Q value of about 4.7, so this takes out a fair amount of energy every time the kick hits right in that part of the spectrum, but still leaves more of the sub information of the bass untouched. And I have another side chain here to the kick doing a little bit of upwards expansion of just a couple dB, right about 83 hertz. So every time the low end of the bass drops away for the kick, it actually recovers a little bit around 80 hertz. And it's got the kind of this nice little feel to it. So the low end is not super stagnant, but basically it just keeps the overall amount of low end energy kind of more where I want it. So take a listen to this with this side chain going. And I'll bypass it. Back on. Yeah, very nice. That's still got a nice consistent low end that I'm liking. Still not my dream bass the way I want it, with the low end as controlled as I normally do with the bottom up approach, but it's a lot better. And it was pretty quick and easy to dial in. The other thing I did is I also side chained the bass bus to the kick bus, and just took out a little bit more at about 110 hertz. So this has been going while you were listening to that other side chain as well. And that's what this is doing, just dripping out a little bit more around 100 hertz. The kick should come through the mix way less muddled now. You should always be able to hear the kick much more clearly in the low end, and we should still keep a consistent low end from the bass, but we won't have the buildup every time the kick and bass are playing together. Let's pop it in the mix and take a listen. Actually bring that up at the 100 hertz a little bit, but still have it dipping down in the side chain. So, yep, it's better than it was, but that's a real quick top-down job. And again, this is something that would have been avoided or at least done right away with a bottom-up mix, but I'm learning, I'm giving it a fair shake. And we're gonna move on now to those electric guitars and get those cleaned up and a little more consistent in the mix and see if we can get some energy back from these two Strats here. Let me play them for you. So these two Strats are panned hard left and hard right with some stereo effects on them and stuff in the bus, but nothing like I had during the bottom-up mix. But all in all, there's just way less energy in these Strats. So these two Strats are sharing a guitar bus with this PRS here. If I keep processing that guitar bus to get these Strats to sound more the way I want it, it's also going to process that clean PRS that's on there. And there's one other rhythm guitar that's on there as well that plays at other parts of the song. So that was a top-down approach that just did not work, having all the guitars on one bus. So we're going to split up and do a second bus now and process those as fast as we can. So let's give that a shot. So I got those two Strats on their own bus now. So you can see here, I left the two individual tracks with nothing on them, just trying to stay true to the top-down processing, and I processed them all on the bus over here. It's easiest to hear back at the beginning of the song, so let me play without this effects chain on that I just added real quick, and then I'll turn it on for you. Yeah, so a lot more color, a lot more clarity. Here's what I did. The first thing I did is hit it with the brick wall limiter to get the peaks under control. And the next thing I did was add dynamic EQ. And this is going to make a little hole for the vocals, a little hole for the lead guitar during the solo, and has a little high-end boost where there's a nice pocket where the toms are not cutting through. This is right below that. So a little dynamic EQ went a long ways. The next thing I did was add some tape, get some tape saturation on there to keep the low end nice and fat. And then I did some parallel upwards compression. I have the depth knob at 28% here and no downwards compression applied. And then I added a little stereo expansion, just a hint of that. At the very end, just a little bit more saturation. Those guitars sound way better. Now you can hear how these Strats just disappear in the mix without the chain on. And bring the mix back on. Now bring the chain back on. Yeah, the chain gives them a lot more crunch and it sets their place in the mix more where I want it. The top-down approach would have worked with this if I would have just assumed from the get that I should have more buses than trying to process all of the rhythm guitars on one bus. But it was worth a shot, and it wasn't very hard to just route them to a fresh bus and process them individually, which is just what this mix calls for. You know, and then all of that is feeding into the master chain on the master bus, and that was the idea of this whole experiment here. So just with those three moves, cleaning up the low end, the rhythm guitars, and the snare drum, and adapting the snare reverb effects, let's go back now and do the comparison of this top-down mix before these three moves, and then play it with these three moves on. So here's the original top-down mix that we heard at the beginning of this video.
Between them eyes. Well, I'd rather go blind than see you win. Yes, I'd rather die trying than to let you live. Get your game on.
And here's with the adjustments that we just made.
Right between them eyes. Well, I'd rather go blind than see you win. Yes, I'd rather die trying than to let you live. Get your game on.
definitely coming along a lot better. So now we are going to go into some more individual tracks and do a little bit more cleanup job and process a little bit more of the buses before we call it quits here. So in order to get more of the sound that I wanted, I did have to undo a little bit of the bus processing and apply it to the individual tracks. Particularly some of the saturation I was trying to do top down all on the buses wasn't doing it for me, and it did sound better to have more specific detailed saturation on individual tracks. And I also needed to process the cymbals completely by themselves instead of them having being part of the drum bus. Yeah, so I removed the cymbals from the drum bus and processed them with limiter 6 because I needed clipping specifically on the cymbals, since there's like 4 different kind of cymbals going on this one track, and I don't have them all split up into individual tracks anyway. So this is basically a cymbal bus. And then I added some stereo expansion to them, and they really needed their own dynamic EQ and a little bit of expansion on the high end, and I needed the low cuts here as well. I also had to decrease saturation settings on guitar buses and the high end of the bass from the bass bus and process them more individually. It just does sound better. So I ended up undoing a little bit of the top down and implementing a little bit more of the bottom up pretty much across the board. And then the electric guitars needed just a hair of automation. I still feel like I have quite a bit more to do before I would really call this finish, but it has come a long ways, and basically what we have here now is a much more of a hybrid approach, top down, bottom up, especially after cleaning up the low end. It's been a really good experiment, and I think I'm going to call it quits here. But let's go ahead now and play the original mix bottom up versus this mix top down.
Yeah, I'm gonna put it right between their minds. Well, I'd rather go blind than see you win. Yes, I'd rather die trying than to let you live. Get your game on. Bring it on, bring it on. Well, right between their minds. Well, I'd rather go blind than see you win. Yes, I'd rather die trying than to let you live. Get your game on. Bring it on, bring it on. Well, I'd rather go blind than see you win. Yes, I'd rather die trying than to let you live. Get your game on. Bring it on, bring it on. Bring it on, bring it on. Well, I'd rather die trying than.
Having compared the bottom-up approach and the top-down approach to the same mix, and even though I'm new at top-down and I know I still have a lot to learn about it, I do like some of the methods of moving on to buses faster than I might have before, but certain things like low-end just absolutely, in my opinion, at least knowing what I know, need to be processed bottom-up. I still don't consider the top-down mix an entire failure. I definitely learned stuff from it, and it definitely will help me adapt my approach going forward. Some things are really intuitive and advantageous to working top down, but like I said in the last video, if you're not working with entirely VST instruments or absolutely gorgeous recordings, then there's a lot to be said for bottom-up mixing. So, but what do you all think? Now that you've seen both of these and you've seen this top-down version come this far, how does it sound compared to the original bottom-up version? Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks a lot for checking this out. And I want to encourage you all again to consider joining us over on the Patreon. We got over 2 hours worth of Q&As, and we do a new episode every week. There's a lot of great discussion going on over there. And the first episode is free for you to check out. And also let me know in the comments of this video anything else that you want me to tackle, and I'll see you all on the next one.